site by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
And welcome back to Dave and Mecky's Shiny Side Out on Revolution Radio, the number one listener-supported radio on the net. So push the donate button. You can check out the archives, get yourself some merch from the station's website, maybe a t-shirt, a mug, or anything you like. And thanks for listening to Revolution Radio. We're halfway through show number, I think I was wrong in the first hour. I think it's only 603. That's what I'm going to put. I think the first hour I now said is 604. I don't know. The last show that I can see that we put up was last week at 602, so this must be 603. Yes. Yeah. That'll do. And, yeah, let's stop there. All right, so being show 603, this is the hypothesis and the epiphany, and I believe that's also part 4. I got that right. Hang on a minute. Part 4. Does that mean that we missed a show? Let's see. 600 was the beginning. That was part 1. Part 2 was 601. Part 3 is 602. Yeah, that's right. So part 4 is 604. No, 603. Whew. Don't worry. If you're confused, you're lucky. You shouldn't be. I'm okay. I'm allowed to be confused. All right. Now, let me see. We are talking about the Homo sapiens events from back in time, and we arrived last week at 80 to 50,000 years ago, and this is talking about the MIS4, beginning of the Upper Paleolithic. Alright, and this is early evidence for behavioral modernity, appearance of MT haplogroups M and N, southern dispersal migration out of Africa, proto-Australoid people of Oceania. Also archaic admixture from Neanderthals in Eurasia, from Denisovans in Oceania, with trace amounts in eastern Eurasia, and from an unspecified African lineage of archaic humans in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as an interbred species of Neanderthals and Denisovans in Asia and Oceania. And what's very interesting about this one is the unspecified African lineage of archaic humans. Now, the Sumerian texts described that there were an original archaic human-esque hominid, and that the Anunnaki played with them to create humans. And so there is this distant relative that we don't know of, and then what they made, which is really interesting. Okay, 50 to 25,000 years ago, behavioral modernity develops according to the Great Leap Forward theory. Extinction of Homo florensis or floresiensis. There we go. fluoresciensis. I've got to remember that pronunciation. M168 mutation carried by all non-African males. Appearance of MT haplogroups U and K. Peopling of North Asian mammoth steppe. Paleolithic art. Extinction of Neanderthals and other archaic human variants, with possible survival of hybrid populations in Asia and Africa. Appearance of the Y haplogroup R2, MT haplogroups J and X. That was all within 25,000 years. Now, 25,000 years ago, Minotogawa man, proto-Mongoloid, it says, from 20 to 14,000 years ago. The last glacial maximum, Epipaleolithic, Mesolithic, Holocene, peopling of the Americas. I think that's grossly underaged there. Appearance of the Y haplogroup R1A, MT haplogroups V and T, various recent divergence associated with environmental pressures, e.g. light skin in Europeans and East Asians. That's the KITLG and ASIP groups. After 30,000 years, Inuit adaptation to high-fat diet and cold climate, 20,000 years ago. Extinction of late surviving archaic humans at the beginning of the Holocene, 12,000 years ago. That was a huge cataclysm, by the way. Accelerated divergence due to selection pressures in populations participating in the Neolithic Revolution after 12,000 years ago, e.g. East Asian types ADH1B associated with rice domestication or lactase persistence. That's very interesting. Okay, let's assume 100,000 years. Enough time for 5 civilizations like ours or similar, however. Humanity is likely a lot older. And we keep discovering this more and more. Every year that goes on, they push the early humans back even further and further and further. And Meki would have said, I know this is where we will lose a few listeners. However, the great antiquity of humanity does not fly in the face of known science. We know there was a bottleneck event for the human population. This means there was a massive reduction in the breeding pairs at this time because there was a huge cataclysm. Genetic bottlenecks in humans. The Toba super eruption, youngest Toba tuff, or simply the YTT2, was a supervolcanic eruption that occurred sometime between 69,000 and 77,000 years ago at the site of the present-day Lake Toba in Sumatra, Indonesia. It is recognized as one of the Earth's largest known eruptions. The related catastrophe hypothesis holds that this event caused a global volcanic winter for 6 to 10 years and possibly a 1,000-year-long cooling episode. The Toba catastrophe theory suggests that a bottleneck of the human population occurred 70,000 years ago, reducing the total population to about 15,000 individuals, when Toba erupted and triggered a major environmental change, including a volcanic winter. The theory is based on geological evidence for sudden climate change at that time and for coalescence of some genes, including mitochondrial DNA Y chromosome, and some nuclear genes, as well as the relatively low level of genetic variation amongst present-day humans. For example, according to one hypothesis, human mitochondrial DNA, which is maternally inherited, and Y chromosomes DNA, paternally inherited, coalesce at around 140,000 to 60,000 years ago, respectively. This suggests that the female line ancestry of all present-day humans traces back to a single female, call her mitochondrial Eve, at around 140,000 years ago, and the male line to a single male, Y chromosome, Adam, at 60 to 90,000 years ago. However, such coalescence is generally expected and does not necessarily indicate a population bottleneck, because mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome DNA are only a small part of the human genome and are atypical in that they are inherited exclusively through the mother or their father, respectively. Most genes are inherited randomly from either the father or the mother, thus cannot be traced to either matrilineal or patrilineal ancestry. Other genes display coalescence points from 2 million to 60,000 years ago, thus casting doubt on the existence of recent and strong bottlenecks. Other possible explanations for limited genetic variation among today's humans include a transplanting model or long bottleneck rather than a catastrophic environmental change. This would be consistent with suggestions that in sub-Saharan Africa, human populations dropped to as low as 2,000 individuals for perhaps as long as 100,000 years before numbers began to increase in the late Stone Age. Genetic bottlenecks in other mammals. Some evidence points to genetic bottlenecks in other animals. In the wake of the Toba eruption, the populations of the Eastern African chimpanzee, Bornean orangutan, Central Indian macaque, the cheetah, the tiger, and the separation of the nuclear gene pools of eastern and western lowland gorillas all recovered from very low numbers around 70,000 years ago. This does not mean that humanity started at that point in time, though it might, but rather that human variety is severely curtailed. Maybe there were many more species, maybe blue-skinned, maybe green, maybe some that were one-eyed, maybe some that were very large, while others might have been very small. We now have ample proof that the human family was much more diverse even as little as 10,000 years ago. A mysterious small human species coexisted with the modern man in China until at least 10,500 years ago, scientists have announced, based on an analysis of an anomalous thigh bone found in a cave. The discovery brings the number of human species coexisting until very recently to 3. Us, this new one, and the so-called hobbit, or Homo floresiensis. Yes, that'll do. That survived on the Indonesian island of Flores until at least 13,000 years ago. To put this in perspective, around when saber-toothed tigers and mammoths were going extinct in the late Ice Age, and agriculture was beginning to develop in the Levant, at least 3 types of humans were roaming the planet. This thigh bone, found in Red Deer Cave in Yunnan province, is about 14,000 years old and is substantially different from a modern man's. Professor Darren Curnow of the University of New South Wales and Professor G. Xu Ping of the Yunnan Institute of Cultural Relics and Archaeology reports in PLOS 1 other remains from the same mysterious species found nearby dates to 10,500 years ago. Thigh bone. The thigh bone is small. I'll start again. The thigh bone is more similar to those possessed by Homo habilis and early Homo erectus, which predated man by some 1.5 million years than to man itself. Interestingly, the book Forbidden Archaeology by Cremo and all, as well as Devolution, highlight the possibility that humanity might be a great deal older. But both works are usually derided by mainstream science, even though their scholarly qualities are not questioned. They cite a great many anomalies in the fossil record and show documented evidence of artifacts and tools and Homo sapiens bones appearing in geological strata they should not. However, when the dating is not in line with what the establishment wants, the offending scientist either self-censors or is barred from the scientific community. So true. Data rejection. Inconvenient dating in Mexico. I know this one. There is the high-profile case of Dr. Virginia Steen McIntyre, a geologist working for the US Geological Survey, the USGS, who was dispatched to an archaeological site in Mexico to date a group of artifacts in the 1970s. This travesty also illustrates how far established scientists will go to guard orthodox tenets. McIntyre used state-of-the-art equipment and backed up her results by using 4 different methods, but her results were off the chart. The lead archaeologist expected a date of 25,000 years or less, and the geologist's finding was 250,000 years or more. These controversial findings are orders of magnitude older than the scientific consensus for habitation of the New World, which generally traces widespread human migration to the New World to 13,000 to 16,000 years ago. The findings in Huehuetlaco have mostly been repudiated by the larger scientific community and have seen only occasional discussion in the literature. The figure of 25,000 years or less was critical to bring Bering Strait crossing theory, and it was the motivation behind the head archaeologist tossing Steen McIntyre's results in a circular file, which is the bin, and asking for a new series of dating tests. This sort of reaction does not occur when dates match the expected chronological model that supports the accepted theories. Steen McIntyre was given a chance to retract her conclusions, but she refused. She found it hard thereafter to get her papers published, and she lost a teaching job at an American university. To be clear, these are the findings. Biostratigraphic researcher Sam Van Landingham has published 2 peer-reviewed analyses that confirm the earlier findings of 250,000 years ago for the tool-bearing strata Huehuetlaco. His 2004 analysis found that those samples could be dated to the Sangamonian interglacial period of 80 to 220,000 years ago by the presence of multiple diatom species, one of which first appeared during this era and others that went extinct by the era's end, says Van Landingham's 2006 paper refined and reconfirmed his 2004 findings. It's very interesting. And here's an interesting side note. The Smithsonian acknowledges the problem. In 1987, paleontologist Jerry McDonald discovered a wide variety of fossilized tracks from several different species of animals and birds located in Permian strata. Among the various fossilized tracks were the clear prints of a human foot. However, the Permian strata has been dated to 290 to 248 million years ago, millions of years before the animals, birds, dinosaurs, and yes, man was supposed to exist. How, then, can these prints be explained? In July 1992, the Smithsonian magazine had an article on these tracks called Petrified Footprints, a puzzling parade of Permian beasts. The magazine acknowledged the mystery, acknowledging what paleontologists like to call problematic. It described what appeared to be a large mammal and bird tracks evolved long after the Permian period, yet these tracks are clearly Permian. While it is commendable that MacDonald and the Smithsonian clearly acknowledge the existence of these tracks in a strata that contradicts the current evolutionary theory, it is noteworthy that they highlight only the mammal and bird prints and do not mention the human footprint found with them. Interestingly enough, since these tracks have been discovered, evolutionists have not tried to argue their authenticity or debunk them, nor have they tried to argue that the footprint isn't human. Often they claim that it's a print that just looks like a human footprint. Their silence is deafening. And if you're interested in more, you should see Petrified Footprints, a puzzling parade of Permian beasts by Jerry MacDonald. The Smithsonian, July 1992, Volume 23, Issue 4, pages 70 to 79. Wow, only 9 pages on it. That's crazy. All right. Standard response to evidence that does not fit. Alleged iron pot in coal. And this is from 2006 by Glenn J. Cuban. Carl Bohr, B-A-U-G-H, and other strict creationists have claimed that in 1912, an electric company employee in Arkansas broke open a large lump of coal, revealing a man-made iron pot. The original coal bed was reportedly mid-Pennsylvanian age, about 300 million years old by conventional geology. Bohr and others suggested that this finding overturns the standard geologic timetable. The following account is presented on Bohr's Creation Evidence website, followed by an advertisement encouraging readers to purchase a cast replica of the pot and nodule, which he described as 5.5 inches wide, 6.5 long, 4.75. Oh man, it wiped me out being outside in all that heat today. The following text is a letter from Frank Kennard, the man who found an iron pot embedded in a large lump of coal. The Creation Evidence Museum has a copy of this letter on file. Sulphur Springs, Arkansas, November 27th, 1948. While I was working in a municipal electric plant in Thomas, Oklahoma, in 1912, I came upon a solid chunk of coal which was too large to use. I broke it with a sledgehammer. This iron pot fell from the centre, leaving the impression or mould of the pot in a piece of coal. Jim Stool, an employee of the company, witnessed the breaking of the coal and saw the pot fall out. I traced the source of the coal and found that it came from the Wilburton, Oklahoma mines. Signed, Frank J. Kennard, sworn to before me in Sulphur, SIC, it says, Springs, Arkansas, this 27th day of November 1948. Julia L. Eldred, NP. My commission expires May 21st, 1951. Benton Co. The problem with this kind of evidence is that it relies heavily on the veracity and memories of the individuals involved, since people commonly lie or are otherwise fallible in this regard. Scientifically, anecdotal evidence is not worth much. That always grates me. One might ask, why would these men make up such a story? There might be any number of reasons for a gag, attention, etc. However, even if they were telling the truth as far as they knew it, there is still an aspect of the report about which they could be mistaken and on which the significance of the find could rest. That's the kind of thing that we expect to hear from science when something doesn't fit. Just remember that. Oh, we have an interlude. Excellent. There are, of course, problems with dating. 3 critical assumptions can affect the results during radioisotope dating. 1. The initial conditions of the rock sample are accurately known. Number 2. The amount of parent or daughter elements in a sample that has not been altered by processes other than radioactive decay. And number 3. The decay rate or half-life of the parent isotope has remained constant since the rock was formed. And the aside here is, I highly recommend reading books, both books, even just for a few different points of view, Forbidden Archaeology and De-Evolution, or Devolution. Now there's a quick data point. So humanity might, just might, be older than we had previously thought. Well, not entirely true. Eastern cultures, specifically the Indian civilization, has no issues with acknowledging the great antiquity of humanity. It is the West that largely subscribes to a linear version of history with an agreed upon drawn some 6 million years ago, the advent of our hominid ancestors. There seems to be, and we have discussed, ample evidence for high civilizations, similar in capability to our own, and some may be more advanced, albeit displaying different characteristics, such as different technologies and energy sources, etc. The pyramids. Perfect alignment to cardinal points, virtually no subsidence, no inscriptions inside the pyramids at all were there. The ones that exist are likely fake, because the only cartouche found in the pyramid spelling Chufu's name is fake, recognizable through a spelling mistake. The name was not written with the correct signs, with the sieve, the quail, the viper, and the quail, which are representing the consonants of k, w, f, u, which it had a solar disk and a re or ray at the beginning instead of the sieve or the k. Instead of the sieve, a circle with several horizontal lines, a circle with a single dot in the middle was written here. The name in the pyramid thus is spoken Re-Ufu. This mistake, unthinkable for ancient Egyptian writers, is explainable on the background of 1837. In that year, an academic book about hieroglyphics had been published called Materia Hieroglyphica, in which the name Khufu was written with a mistake. The lines of the sieve were so close together that they appeared in the print like a massive disc. Another way of writing re, it was, and is known that Vyse, V-Y-S-E, had this book with him on his excavation. The whole 1837 expedition stood under a bad sign. The money had run out and nothing what had been hoped for had been achieved. So a member of the expedition planned to spice up the results, and he went into the new discovered chambers at the moment the blast fumes had vanished, and he painted, equipped with the fatal misprint from the book, some text to the walls. And there he painted the name Khufu as he found it in the book, with a solar disk and not with a sieve. The faker, presumably J.R. Hill, also made another mistake. Instead of hieroglyphics, he used a letter system only used for papyri, a handwriting called hieratics. I haven't heard that word before. Now we have megalithic structures all over the world. If you peer into the design, the construction, the materials of each of those megalithic structures, you'll find similar shapes, cuts, tooling marks, appearance of the structures themselves, which, if we didn't have connection to each other and we didn't have trade, and I'm talking trade from like Africa to South America and from Central Europe to Southern America as well, right? Which is crazy that they should be the same. There should not have been contamination between those environments, and if anyone was going to build anything, you'd imagine they'd be building them in different ways, and they didn't. Baalbek, the UNESCO listed World Heritage Site, 3 1,000-ton monoliths in the platform. That's just insane. Several others, less than 1,000-ton stones, are still in the quarry. How did they get those other stones to Baalbek, right? How did they get them there? It's nuts. The Inca walls, perfect fit, no mortar, and they're earthquake proof. Because all the shapes in the wall are all different, they don't harmonize. And so the most resilient to earthquakes, you can only imagine from the time when they were installed, if you want to call it that, to now, there must have been a ton of earthquakes that have occurred, which would have displaced, other buildings. But those structures are still there, still good to go, and I think it stands as a testament to their construction of yet something that we have not learned. We build in concrete and steel, and that works to a certain degree, but it also has longevity. And there's a lot of buildings that were built 100 years ago, or even through the 70s for that matter, that shouldn't be. They should be knocked down and replaced today. What else do we have? Oh yeah, that's right. So we've also got underwater structures. There's the Bimini Road, Indian Ocean. There's the highway that went to Sri Lanka from India. There's an underwater structure. There's the sunken. So I shall start. There's the sunken Egyptian town. There's ones from in Greece. There's also a sunken carved structure near Japan that's underwater. We know that we suspect that there's way more, and we just haven't found them yet. From a time when the sea level was less, and you just built near the water. And so if the water level's lower, you're going to build further away from land as we know it today, and everyone followed the fresh water as we do today. So no change there. Just that we're looking in the wrong places. We really want to find old, because if you think that if you only had feet, right, to get around and no vehicles, then you would live close to your water source and your food source. Moving a lot of water around isn't something that, without plumbing, like the Romans, you're really not going to have you're not going to have a good time without a lot of water available to you, especially in the heat. So something else which stands out is the ancient myths. Now, I'm a big fan of myths, and I think they're told and believed, not believed, and I think that's on us. We should be taking more credence to these stories, because as we learn more about them, we discover that they're indeed true, or there's a collective of myths where there's the central nugget of them all is true, where everyone is a slight story, different tale. Like if 4 people saw a car accident on a large intersection, every person would describe it differently. It's just the way it is. So as myths go, the people from India have acknowledged a longer history than the West is willing to admit. They have the Vedic texts, the Mahabharata. They've got Vimanas, which are flying machines. I remember around what were those voice-controlled doors? Open Sesame or Open Sesame. What are flying chariots? I remember that. But there's Bible references to those. There's similar flood myths all across the globe. They're all talking about the same thing. There's even a time before the moon where there were humans to a certain extent on the planet. I know the Aboriginals, the First Nations people in Australia, they have a time before the moon, and there was an excerpt in the Bible that says that there was people here on the earth before the moon. So that's something really interesting to research if you ever got some time up your sleeve. We did a show on it. So what about the linguistic similarities? So you can trace language and the adoption of words through mostly trade and interaction between civilizations, and you can see how the word evolved to where it is today. That is actually really cool. Mekki and I did a pretty good show on that one. Berlit's book examples. I don't have any of those examples offhand to quote you, but I know that the English language that we all speak today has, at a point in time, adopted about 15,000 words from German. Well, in fact, that Germania and the whole Viking era, there was a lot of trade interaction, and when there was a common language that people spoke, and it eventuated in what we say today. And of course, there's a lot of influence there, but so we did a show on where they all came from, and there was I think the Sumerians language was an isolate. There wasn't one before that, which was extremely interesting. How about Swift? Swift mentions that Phobos and Deimos, and he also mentions their moons of Mars, and he talks about the properties in Gulliver's Travels. This was from 1726, and they weren't discovered until 1877. That's incredible, calling that out so early. I do think we've got the ability to foresee the future, and sometimes writers get into a mode where they're probably, reaching out with their mind and discussing something from the future. You can ignore that if you like, but there's plenty of examples for that. What about old maps? I think there's a couple of really good ones. I forget the years that they came out, but the westernized map that came out, I forget which year it was. It didn't show at all Antarctica, but there was an earlier map that showed almost identically placed everything else and Antarctica. I think that was a Dutch map. I can't remember now. It's so long ago. So old maps show geographical features that should have been unknown at the time of the map's creation, and awareness of the Earth's curvature before that official discovery. That also includes, Antarctica was one. The features unknown. Oh, there was something else. I remember this. Oh, I'll just move on. Okay, what about the moon? Meki's favourite topic, and I still can't believe he didn't make it to the show. Potentially the largest artificial artifact even. Ancient cultures speak of a time before the moon. I actually spoke about it. Also, it rang like a bell twice. So it's more likely to be hollow to a certain extent. And I don't mean just a crust, but possibly an artificial construct. The ebb and flow satellites were sent there, and the quote from the head of NASA at the time was, when he described the function of these satellites, where one flies in front of the other and they're in the same orbit, and the one at the back can detect whether the one in front goes up or down during the orbit, and that means there's more or less gravity at that point. And that's how they're able to determine what is there, what the moon's made of below. But the guy from NASA said to determine whether there is anything below the crust or something, what's below the crust, if anything. So he makes a pretty strong call out there for the moon to be hollow. And look, how would you feel if science declared that the moon was indeed inhabited by aliens, and that it was theirs the whole time? It was never ours. Yeah, we looked up at it, but they'd lived there forever. Could you imagine that? And how that would make you feel? Because I think it's a good question to ask. And be prepared, because it could be something declared there. Like, we live on the surface here, but aliens could very well live underwater in the Southern Ocean. All right, here's another good one. According to Bode's law, there should be a planet at the very point that there's an asteroid belt. All other planets except for Neptune follow Bode's law. Isn't that crazy too? So I think Neptune is also rotating on its side, like it's rolling around on a 2D plane, like it's physically rolling. And there's also two other planets whose rotation itself on the solar system plane is in reverse. It's like it was whipped upside down by a very large body that came through the solar system. And Neptune could have just been tugged or pulled to its side. It could have only been rotated 90 degrees rather than 180. I think this is just extraordinary. And I want to also point out that the Sumerians, UFO cowboy, UFO cowboy has posted into the chat room a picture of Krusty the Clown in the emergency broadcast bunker with a battery in one hand and a scorpion in the other. And I think he's done 72 hours straight at this point. So he's not really thinking. With 9 minutes left, Bode's Law. Bode's Law says that each planet, because of its mass in AUs, should be at a certain point. And Bode's Law says that Mercury should be a little further away from the Sun. It's currently 0.39, and Bode's Law says 0.4. It's very close. Venus, Bode's Law says it's 0.7 is where it should be, but Venus is actually at 0.72. Earth is 1, and Bode's Law says 1. Mars, 1.52 is the actual distance, and Bode's Law says 1.6. Just a little bit more. Okay, so what do we got? Uranus is on its side. I always get those two mixed up. The planet is flipped over on its side like a weeble. I don't know what a weeble is. That wouldn't unwobble. Actually, all the planets in the solar system have some level of axial tilt. The Earth is tilted at 23.5 degrees away from the Sun's equator. Mars is 25 degrees. Mercury is 2.1 degrees tilted. These tilts are everywhere, but Uranus is 97.8 degrees. All right, so the asteroid belt, Bode's Law suggests that there should be a planet out there at 2.8. Jupiter, 5.2 and 5.2 matches Bode's Law. Saturn is should be a little further away according to Bode's Law, 9.54. Bode's Law says 10. Uranus, it's pretty close. 19.6 is where Bode's Law places it, but 19.1, so it's 0.5 off. And I would actually suggest that the mass of the actual body should also include the mass of all of its moons. There you go. So that you can place it in the correct place. Neptune, 3.1, but Bode's Law doesn't even cater for it. It's not there. It's zip. Pluto, 39.5. Bode's Law, 38.8. Planet X, while we haven't found its actual location, it should be 77.2, according to Bode's Law. Good on you, Bode, for coming up with that. I'm not going to do any more. I think I'm going to cease it there. So, next is 604. I've written that in the show notes, and I'll share that with Maggie so we know where we're going to be coming up next. So, what do you think about all of this? Now, I'm surprised that UFO Cowboy posted that image, by the way. I'm just going to say that out loud because that is something that someone else that I know would paste. Let's see where Mackie's nowhere. He says maybe. He can maybe make the second hour, but I think we're done with the second hour. So, yeah, that's not going to happen. And, yeah. So I believe that my mate is UFO Cowboy. That's what I'm going to put out there. You give yourself away, it's what you do. Let's see what happens. So what do you think about the age of humanity? I know we breezed through it, but what do you think about it? Do you think it's heaps longer? Do you think it's possibly millions? Do you think the Anunnaki had anything to do with humans at all? Do you think we were lifted from somewhere else and brought here? Is that possible? Do you think maybe that evolution is right? Do you think, is your creationist believer? Because, you can always comment on the bottom of the video and let me know, and I'll read through them, and I'll make your point though. Make a good point. Don't just go, yeah, that's what it is. Told ya. Don't be like that. Tell me what you think. And it shouldn't be anyone who's gonna, be mean to these people who put themselves out there. Because I'm interested in knowing more. If you think there's yet again another thing of an origin, if you're into intelligent design, then someone made us. And that's kind of how I steer myself towards. The Anunnaki tales by the Sumerians are then more than likely are true, and the rest are really bad photocopies of it. Let's put it that way. Yeah. So the Sumerians also, it sounds like they were writing what was being narrated to them, because they themselves could not have known, the relative size of all the planets, the color of the planets. They could not have known this, right? They could not have known that the Earth was in another orbit prior and smacked by a larger body. They could not have known that. And yet, at their basic skill level, as a noob human, they were pretty smart. How'd they know that? Couldn't know it. In fact, they had listed planets that we hadn't discovered even into the 70s. They did that. So you have to admit to yourself, not to me, because I don't care what you think, but you've got to admit to yourself that it's odd that they should know these things. Because that's important. If you're willing to dismiss that, then you're probably willing to dismiss all kinds of other things and just be happy and relaxed in your life that you don't really care, too much about, you don't think about. Maybe it's not for you. Maybe that level of complexity in your life, who needs that? Well, don't worry about it. I'm going to be like the oracle that says, when you leave here, you're going to wonder, would you have broken the vase if I didn't mention it? Because that's what's going to happen. You're not going to worry about it. Because this doesn't affect your work, home, and shops triangle. Why should it? Why should it change the way you think? Anyway, comments below the video. Do like and subscribe. And also, send it to someone else and see what they think. Probably not this one. It is a bit itchy and scratchy. Well, zappy and pinchy. Anyway, this has been another Shiny Side Out. Sadly, Meki couldn't make it. But he'll be back for Plato's Cave Tuesday and Thursday mornings at 7 a.m. and back again next Sunday for another Shiny Side Out with Dave and Mackie. But I'll be absent. Take care, everyone, and stay tuned for Jer Bear's awesome show coming up next after hours. And I'll see you next week.